Welcome to the Deep Dive Lab, where we dive deep into fascinating science stories filled with surprising discoveries, unexpected twists, and thought-provoking ideas. And today we are looking at something that is basically a slow-moving global earthquake.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty accurate way to describe it.
Because, according to a recent projection published in The Lancet, by the year 2050, nearly three-quarters of all countries are going to have fertility rates that are just too low to maintain their population sizes.
Right, which means we are staring down a massive global demographic transition. I mean, the numbers in East Asia alone are staggering.
Oh, absolutely. Like you look at China, and in 2023, their total fertility rate plummeted to about 1.0.
Which is, well below the replacement level. You really need a 2.1 to keep a population stable. Hitting a 1.0, that signals a population that is rapidly aging and honestly will eventually shrink at an accelerating pace.
And governments are visibly panicking about this, right? Like it's a daily headline.
Oh, they're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks.
Exactly. We see these perinatalist fiscal interventions everywhere. Administrations throwing cash benefits at young families, rolling out aggressive tax incentives, subsidizing childcare.
They're attempting to engineer a baby boom using all the traditional economic levers.
But the wild part is the rates just keep dropping regardless. None of it is really working.
And that failure, it forces a complete reevaluation of the underlying assumptions driving these policies.
Right.
We have to ask why the old tricks aren't working anymore.
Right. So what if the key to understanding the global baby bust isn't found in a hospital or a nursery or, I don't know, a subsidized daycare center? What if the real secret is actually hiding inside a mortgage application?
Which brings us to our source material for this deep dive. It's a 2026 research article published in the journal PNAS.
Okay, lay it on us.
It's authored by demographic researchers Xin Zhang, Dangxue Wu, and William A.V. Clark. And our mission today, alongside you listening, is to uncover how the sheer macroeconomic cost of putting a roof over your head dictates the most intimate microeconomic decision a person can make.
Which is whether or not to start a family.
Exactly.
The historical context here is just fascinating to me, like how scientists originally viewed family planning.
Yeah, for decades, economists essentially treated human reproduction as, well, a math equation.
Right, like it was just cold, hard calculus.
Driven heavily by classic economic models from thinkers like Gary Becker and H. Greg Lewis back in the mid-20th century. The prevailing theory was that having children is a utility-maximizing decision.
A utility-maximizing decision. Wow! That sounds so romantic.
Doesn't it? But economists basically viewed children through the lens of consumer theory. They treated them as a special kind of quote-unquote good that was subject to income and prices.
So the logic assumes that if a government provides more money or, reduces the cost of having kids by subsidizing childcare, families will logically just purchase more of this good.
That was the idea, yeah. If they have more disposable income, they'll have more kids.
But that math equation clearly broke down over the last few decades.
It did, because it completely ignored a massive sociological shift. The researchers point to a framework in the literature known as incoherence.
Incoherence. What does that mean in this context?
So, over the last 50 years, women have fought for and gained immense equity in individually oriented institutions.
Meaning like higher education and the labor market.
Right. But there has been this sustained, really stubborn inequity in family-oriented institutions. The division of labor at home, the structure of family life.
It hasn't evolved at the same pace as the expectations in the workplace.
Exactly. So women are handed this dual burden, this really harsh dilemma, where pursuing career aspirations directly conflicts with building a family.
It's like trying to launch a startup business. You wouldn't launch a new company if your office rent was going to eat 80% of your revenue from day one.
That's a great way to look at it.
You look at the overhead and the operational friction, and you just realize the venture is physically impossible to sustain. You're bankrupt before you even start. Taking that startup analogy further, modern demographic research realized that just giving people a small childcare subsidy, that doesn't fix the massive overhead cost of the office rent.
A tax credit doesn't pay the lease.
Right. So scientists pivoted away from just looking at general income and started focusing on three specific mechanisms that drive fertility decisions.
Okay, what are they?
Constraint relief, uncertainty reduction, and wealth effects.
Okay, let's translate those into physical reality. Constraint relief is having enough liquid capital in a monthly budget to actually afford a child's needs, right?
Yep, day-to-day survival money.
And uncertainty reduction is, I guess, the psychological security of knowing you won't be evicted next month.
The peace of mind, exactly.
And wealth effects. That refers to holding long-term appreciating assets that make a household feel economically robust.
You nailed it. And housing sits at the absolute dead center of all three of those mechanisms.
Yeah.
It is the single largest expenditure for most households.
So extremely high housing costs tighten the monthly budget, creating a severe constraint. Renting in a volatile, appreciating market spikes uncertainty. But conversely, owning a home, that builds generational wealth.
And the physical reality of this constraint is incredibly visceral. Like, we aren't just talking about lines on a spreadsheet here.
No, not at all.
We are talking about a young couple renting a tiny, maybe 400 square foot apartment, maybe still sharing space with extended family. They literally do not have the physical square footage for a crib, let alone a second bedroom.
Right, the physical space is a hard boundary. But proving that the housing market casually suppresses fertility, that is notoriously difficult.
Because everything in an economy happens simultaneously. You can't just isolate one variable.
Exactly. You would need a massive, accidental, real-world experiment. A shock to the system that changes the rules for one specific group of people while leaving everyone else completely untouched.
A natural experiment.
Yes. And that exact scenario unfolded in China in the year 2014.
Okay, take us to China in 2014. What was going on?
At the time, China was experiencing a severe collision of trends. You had explosive, unprecedented growth in urban housing prices, running in parallel with persistently low fertility rates.
Tough combination.
To understand the experiment, we have to look at a unique institutional framework China uses, called the Housing Provident Fund, or HPF.
Okay, the HPF.
Yeah.
So, as I understand it from the source, it functions as a mandatory savings-based housing finance system for formal urban employees.
That's right. Both the employee and the employer pay a portion of the salary into this fund.
Almost like a retirement account, but for housing.
Sort of.
Yeah. Right.
And in return, the employee gains access to preferential mortgage credit when they go to buy a home. We're talking significantly better interest rates and much lower down payment requirements than you'd get from the commercial banking sector.
Okay, so it's a huge perk if you're in the formal urban workforce.
A massive perk. But in 2014, the Chinese real estate market began to stall. Yeah, and fearing the broader economic impact of a housing crash, the government initiated a major reform of the HPF system, purely to stimulate real estate demand.
Just to pump life back into the housing market.
Exactly. They massively relaxed credit requirements for anyone in the fund. They lowered the required down payments to as little as 20%, slashed the interest rates on these specific loans, and raised the ceiling on how much capital individuals could actually borrow.
Wait, so if the government's goal was just to stop a real estate crash by injecting basically free venture capital into the market,
Demographic researchers must have quickly realized they could use this policy shift as a giant petri dish for fertility.
that is wild. You suddenly have a massive cohort of people enrolled in the HPF who woke up one day to a much easier path to homeownership.
Living right next door to informal workers who face the exact same brutal housing market with zero preferential credit.
It's the perfect setup. So how did Zhang, Wu, and Clark actually investigate this?
They utilized this divide to investigate the causal link. They employed a methodology known as the difference in differences design, or DD.
Difference in differences. Sounds intense.
It's just a statistical way to compare two groups over time. They pulled a decade of national data from the China Household Finance Survey, spanning 2011 to 2021, and they tracked urban married households with women in prime childbearing years, aged 18 to 40.
Okay, but to make that methodology work, the researchers would have to prove that the two groups, right, the people in the HPF and the people outside of it, were on the exact same fertility trajectory before the 2014 policy change.
You're exactly right. That is the core requirement of a DD design. It's known as the parallel trends assumption.
Right, because if they were already diverging, the data is useless.
Exactly. But the researchers rigorously demonstrated that before 2014, the fertility rates of both groups were moving in tandem. Any sudden divergence after 2014 could then be confidently attributed to the sudden availability of cheap housing credit.
And the divergence they found is just staggering. Access to this preferential housing credit significantly increased both the probability of having a new child and the total number of children a family ultimately had.
Yeah. In the short run, exposure to this looser housing credit increased the probability of a family having a new child by 2.73 percentage points relative to the control group.
And Okay, 2.73 percentage points might not sound like a lot at first glance, but if you look at the baseline probability of having a child in that control group,
Which was only about 0.13.
right, a 2.73 percentage point jump translates to a nearly 21% increase over the baseline fertility rate.
It's a huge leap.
A 21% surge in births generated entirely by tweaking mortgage access. That is crazy.
And it didn't just increase the number of kids, it also altered the timeline of people's lives.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the data shows this credit access actively advanced the timing of marriage and first births. Removing the financial bottleneck allowed people to move out of multi-generational homes, secure a property with a second bedroom, and, get their lives started.
So basically, a better mortgage rate literally gets people to the altar faster.
It absolutely does. The physical constraint was lifted, and the behavioral response was immediate.
Okay, but I have to play skeptic for a second here.
Go for it.
Looking at the timeline, 2014 to 2015 is precisely when China began easing the decades-old one-child policy, right? Transitioning toward a two-child policy.
That is correct.
So how can Zhang, Wu, and Clark possibly separate a mortgage rate drop from a literal historic change in national reproductive law? Wouldn't everyone just say, oh, they changed the law, of course there are more babies?
It's a completely fair quotient, and the researchers anticipated this exact confounding variable. They designed incredibly rigorous tests to isolate the mortgage effect. First, they leveraged regional variations in how the one-child policy was enforced. Historically, different provinces levied varying fines, which were officially known as social support fees, for having an unauthorized child.
Okay, so some provinces were super strict and expensive, others were a bit more lenient.
Exactly. So if the sudden 2014 fertility bump was merely a rebound effect from the government relaxing the one-child policy, the most dramatic spikes in births should have occurred in the provinces that previously enforced the most punishing financial fines.
That makes total sense. People who were priced out by the fines would suddenly start having kids.
Right. But the researchers mapped the fertility increases against the historical fine structures of different regions and found no correlation.
No correlation at all.
None. The housing credit effect remained consistent and powerful regardless of how strict a local province's fines used to be. The babies weren't born because a fine was lifted. They were born because a mortgage was secured.
Wow. That is brilliant methodology. Did they test it any other way?
They did. They also tested public sector employees. In China's system, public sector workers, those holding the iron rice bowl jobs, they faced existential professional penalties for violating the one-child policy.
Up to and including immediate termination. Right.
Yep, you lose your job, your security, everything. So, if the 2014 baby bump was driven by the changing law, those public sector workers should have demonstrated a massive, disproportionate spike in births compared to private sector workers once the law was lifted.
Because they were finally allowed to have a second kid without losing their livelihood.
Exactly. But the data showed no such differential spike.
That is incredible. They proved it was the housing market.
They really did.
Yeah.
But isolating the housing credit as the true catalyst brings us to the most counterintuitive and perhaps concerning revelation of the entire study.
Okay, what is the twist?
The fertility bump triggered by these cheap mortgages was not uniform across society. It was not the struggling working-class families who saw the largest increase in family formation.
Oh, of course. The intervention predominantly boosted the birth rates of socioeconomically advantaged groups.
Yep. Individuals who already owned homes, held higher incomes, and possessed local urban residencies.
Okay, we need to unpack that local urban residency part. That's the hukou system, right?
Exactly, the hukou system. It's a critical mechanism here. In China, your hukou ties your access to social services to a specific geographic location.
Right, so without a local urban hukou, a family moving to a Tier 1 city often cannot enroll their child in the local public school system.
Or access heavily subsidized municipal health care.
It acts as this biological restrictor plate on urban family planning. Like, even if you manage to buy an apartment, lacking the hukou means lacking the fundamental civic infrastructure required to actually raise a child.
And combining that civic restriction with the financial architecture of the HPF completely explains the inequality of the outcome.
Because easing credit only serves as a catalyst if a household possesses enough baseline wealth to qualify for the loan in the first place.
Precisely. Millions of low-income, migrant, or informal sector workers aren't enrolled in the HPF at all.
And even for those who are enrolled, a relaxed down payment requirement is entirely useless if their monthly income just cannot cover the mortgage on a crazy expensive urban apartment.
Yeah, using government policy to lower interest rates in this way, it's like
It's like offering a massive municipal grant to help citizens buy a car. But that grant only generates mobility for the people who can already afford the recurring costs of insurance, maintenance, and gas.
That's a perfect analogy.
For everyone else, the car remains an impossible luxury, regardless of the initial discount.
And for the wealthy, this policy functioned as a highly effective wealth multiplier. Think about it. If a household already owned a home, this influx of cheap credit allowed them to purchase a second property as a lucrative investment.
Or upgrade to a significantly larger home with dedicated space for children.
Exactly. It dramatically expanded their budget constraints, providing massive injections of that uncertainty reduction and wealth effect we discussed earlier.
So bringing this back home for the listener, this research provides a completely new lens for viewing our own neighborhoods and local macroeconomic policies.
It really does.
The implication is that demographic policy and housing policy can no longer be treated as separate academic disciplines. Like, societies have spent years attempting to reverse the economic disaster of a shrinking, rapidly aging population by treating fertility as an isolated variable.
Which just doesn't work.
No. Offering a $500 tax credit or a few months of paid parental leave is essentially a rounding error if a young family is hemorrhaging 60% of their take-home pay on rent.
Housing security serves as the literal and psychological foundation of family formation.
The irony of this historical event is it's kind of wild. A policy designed purely to stimulate commercial real estate transactions ended up being one of the most highly effective pronatalist strategies documented in modern demographics.
It's a fascinating accident of history. It also serves as a glaring warning about the inequality trap.
Right, because if governments review this data and decide to utilize easy credit as the primary solution to the global baby bust, they risk supercharging socioeconomic stratification.
Opening the credit taps exclusively allows the upper middle class to afford the physical space required to build families.
And the populations unable to secure those leveraged loans are left entirely behind, completely priced out of both homeownership and parenthood.
Which is why the researchers emphasize that the solution isn't merely flooding the market with debt. True demographic stability requires integrating genuine, structural housing affordability into family support systems.
The goal must be making the underlying asset itself affordable and accessible, not just making the debt easier to acquire for those who are already wealthy.
Exactly. Supply-side solutions, zoning reforms, and actual cost reductions must pair with credit access.
Okay, synthesizing this entire investigation leaves us with 3 crucial takeaways for you to keep in mind. First, the massive global decline in fertility cannot be attributed solely to changing cultural preferences or the advancement of women in the workplace.
Right. It is deeply causally tied to the skyrocketing macroeconomic costs of housing, which creates severe economic uncertainty and chronically delays family formation.
Second, the data clearly demonstrates that loosening housing credit and lowering the barriers to homeownership directly and causally increases both marriage rates and the frequency of childbirths. Removing the financial constraint literally changes the timeline of human lives.
And third, credit-based interventions utilized in isolation are highly flawed instruments. Without broader structural reforms, these policies disproportionately benefit populations that already possess significant wealth and resources,
Entirely excluding vulnerable demographics from the benefits of family formation.
So, returning to that initial projection from the Lancet we talked about at the start.
The world in 2050 dominated by shrinking, aging populations.
Right. It becomes incredibly clear that the biological foundation of our future population is inextricably linked to the physical foundations of the homes we choose to build today.
If citizens cannot afford a foundation of concrete and wood, they are structurally incapable of building a family on top of it.
Which leaves a deeply provocative question regarding the future of municipal planning.
What's that?
If governments begin officially utilizing the housing market and zoning laws as direct instruments for population control and demographic growth, how might that alter the literal landscape of the neighborhoods you live in tomorrow?
Oh, wow.
Could your future ability to secure a mortgage or the specific interest rate you were offered by a bank eventually be tied directly to your family planning decisions?
That is a concept that fundamentally changes how you look at the next real estate listing you scroll past.
It really is a whole other beast to consider.
Well, thank you for coming along on this investigation with us. There is always more to learn, so be sure to follow and subscribe to the show so you never miss a deep dive. Until next time.